Ah, the wild, wild west, a region and time that are filled with so many things, but probably most importantly, debauchery as well as, well, you guessed it, a little bit of death. Some might say it would be darn near impossible to survive out here on your own. Well, today we're going to give it our best shot, the old college try. Fair warning, I did drop out. We do have a bit of a leg up on the wildlife out here at least, as we're packing around our grandpappy's pistol, assuming they get close enough that this little thing can hit them. I should also point out that this planet is absolutely packed to the gills with frontier as well as tribal factions alike that we can either coexist with or go to war with. First rule of the West though is securing some food, and that's exactly what we were struggling to do right off the bat, but eventually we got the hang of it. The next thing we would need to do is cut down some cacti, that way we could acquire some resources such as wood to build a proper shelter, or as proper of a shelter as it's gonna get out here. Thankfully, the nearby ruins of a lost mining city was still here, with plenty of tables as well as a few urns that we could decorate our camp with. And using some steel, we could make a proper place to put our buttocks while we eat. While the night was still young though, we cut up our iguana and made our very first meal. Some nice, delicious iguana steaks that we promptly filled our little tummy with. And with our hunger satiated, we could finally get a good night's rest. You know what? Maybe the Wild West isn't that bad after all. Perhaps I've spoken too soon, as I did end up spotting a mountain lion lurking outside our camp. If we weren't inside this canopy, I have a feeling we would be dinner for tonight. The next morning, we had a beautiful sight to behold. It would appear a rattlesnake and an iguana decided to take each other out. This is what we in the West call an opportunity. This one in particular was another opportunity to fill up our bellies, this time around with some rattlesnake bites. Though the local wildlife isn't exactly what I would call sustainable food. At least not as much as the crops that we could be growing, which will be a constant source of food, and we won't actually have to hunt for it, so that's a plus. We ended up growing some cotton for cloth, that way we can make a proper tent as well as some clothing. We would also end up growing some hay grass, as it's for a special construction project, but it would also be useful if we got any animals. And then last but not least, we're also growing rice for food. As the night was coming to an end, we also spotted a beautiful pioneer woman out here. Similar to the rattlesnakes of the area, beautiful but extremely dangerous. Either way though, she had some stuff to trade, but we didn't want to buy anything off of her, and she didn't want to purchase anything from us, so we just went on our separate ways. Shockingly, we would spot that mountain lion that was lurking around the camp, dead as a doorknob, not too far away from us. Out here, even the deadliest of predators can quickly become prey. I was then informed that Jim Bob here had named his Peepaw's pistol the Coyote, which I found quite interesting since coyotes most likely eat snakes and possibly iguanas if they had the chance, and that's what we've been shooting with it. We then began working on some defenses. Because of the lack of resources in the desert here, we decided to build some little mud mounds that we could hide behind if we were to get into a gunfight. One little bit of wood we had collected thus far we would use to build a tailoring bench, which would then enable us to make some patch leather. Said patch leather would be absolutely perfect for an exquisite cowboy hat. Not only will this hat protect our sensitive little eyes from the sunlight, but we also look sharp as a razor. We found a steel vein in the side of one of our mountains and began digging at it. The reason we needed steel is for a melee weapon. In particular, we would actually end up making a hatchet. Not only will it help us when we're cutting down cacti, but if anybody gets a little too close, we could give them a good little poke with it. Well, speak of the devil, we have our very first raid. Although this chap is carrying a melee weapon and a shield, so I don't think I want to use my hatchet. We would try to run away and fire at him. Eventually, this ended up working. This was to be expected out here. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Even with it being self-defense, I don't think that poor Jim Bob here really anticipated what this would feel like. I caught him moping by the fire for a few hours, no doubt contemplating what had just happened. I think I'm going to give him a little bit of space. Eventually though, he would have to pull himself together so that we could do some trading with these nice gentlemen. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford their pistol well, even after selling everything that they would be willing to buy, so we ended up just making a little bit of silver off of them. A bit of time later, we had our very first harvest of rice, which was quite exciting as we wouldn't have to hunt down all the iguana anymore. To store all this rice, we would end up building a steel food basket. Now, this will not prevent it from rotting, but this will prevent it from deteriorating in rain and other weather conditions, of course. Speaking of which, the rain was pelting poor old Jim Bob's head as he was getting a first harvest of our cotton plants as well. With this cloth, we'd be able to build ourselves some proper amenities like this nice tent. Ooh la la. Just as a fine cowboy duster, which we immediately began working on, but... stupid crocodiles. Hi-ya! Yeah, I think that'll do the trick. Well, at the very least, our gun-slinging, croc-killing desperado has a very nice duster to go along with his hat. By this point, I realized I'd rather have a much more trustworthy source for wood, so we ended up planting some fiber corn. I did have tree sowing research unlocked when we started, but unfortunately, Jim Bob's plant skill isn't high enough. We ended up having a gunsmith trader show up, but we didn't have near enough money to purchase anything, and they didn't want to buy anything, so we just kind of let them hang out around the camp until they left. For the last few days, we've also been working on cutting down all the cacti in the area for all the glorious wood. Using this wood, we would end up building a very small cabin for him to stay in. This way he's less exposed to the elements. So much for that rough and tough cowboy. Look at him, he looks like a little rotisserie chicken all snuggled up in that bed. Some time later, we had a fella by the name of Joey who claimed that his ex-lover chased him away from his home and he wanted to stay with us here for a while. Well, Jim Bob is a bit of a sucker for a sob story, so we accepted. Now, I do realize this could be a dangerous mistake, but we need a helping hand around here, especially with building things, and I mean, look at that construction skill. Besides, we would force him to drop his pistol before we let him enter the camp. Not only would this ensure our safety, but his as well, because now we wouldn't have to shoot him if he gets a little too out of line. We would then have the opportunity to name our faction and our settlement. I ended up going with Jim Bob's Mules because we're very hard workers, and also Mule Meadow because, I don't know, it seemed fitting, even though this is a desert. I don't know, I'm trying, okay? We would end up facing quite the fire due to a dry thunderstorm. We eventually got it put out, but not before it took many of our crops with it. Luckily though, we still have plenty of resources like hay that we could use to create a covered carriage. Yes, I know, exquisite, isn't it? Don't be jealous. Okay, maybe you could be a little jealous if you like. This bad boy should help us out with any trade missions that we do with other factions, though, as it can haul quite a bit of resources, as well as guns, food, furniture, anything that we don't need anymore. We are ready. Perhaps if we have some constant silver pouring into this area, we could develop it into our own little town, a bustling little village. I also wanted to mention that I spotted some hyenas lurking around our camp, and I actually sent Jim Bob out there to attempt to tame them. Unfortunately, this failed, but we'll keep trying. But just like that, my friends, it is now day 25, and in case you're new around these parts, I feel it's important to mention that every 25 days here on the Rat Night channel, we will be facing a custom boss battle. It's kinda like a tradition where I torture myself. Most notably for the boss battle, we'll be going up against the Slicer gang, a local gang that is made up of hired thugs and mercenaries. And this, my friends, is their leader. Appropriately going by the name of Slicer, she carries around a large handheld mortar as well as some type of claymore sword, it would appear. It's also quite well known that she is a veteran of some past war, but decided to desert the military after finding a mysterious golden cube on one of her missions, said to have drove her insane. Well, I don't know about all that, but I think a few pieces of lead to the old sternum should do the trick on her. We couldn't exactly line up a shot from this distance, so we would send Joey down to engage her in melee combat, holding her still enough that Jim Bob could try to shoot her in the back. In doing so, though, Joey had managed to knock the mortar out of her hands. Jim Bob took it and shot her. Well, he actually shot Joey and killed him by accident. Oopsie. Now the Jim Bob's the only cowpoke left. Slicer would try to chase him down, even kind of getting to him at one point there, but she didn't manage to hit him with the sword, thank God. On the contrary, Jim Bob managed to shoot her several times, but her bulletproof waistcoat was really living up to its name. But after an extreme amount of blood loss, the next bullet was so painful it caused her to collapse into the sand, dropping all of her weapons. She's simply unconscious though, not dead, and that's important because normally we could try to recruit someone, but she's unwaveringly loyal to the Slicer gang, and I don't feel like dealing with that. So we would simply take all of her gear and use her very own sword to finish her off. Now that she's gone, she won't be needing this masterwork Plastil bulletproof waistcoat. Oh my. Oh, and she also dropped that strange golden cube that all the rumors were about. I decided that we would keep it and maybe try to sell it. Ah, yes, and we also have Joey's corpse that will need to be buried. I'm very sorry about killing you, old friend, although we really didn't know each other all that well, I suppose. It's just part of doing business out in these parts for him. I didn't noticed late one evening that Jim Bob here was messing around in the sand, and it says that he's obsessed with the cube. It caused him to fall into a daze, and he's now building statues of the cube. Well, this can't be good. Maybe the rumors about Slicer's little cube insanity are true. We need to try to get rid of that cube ASAP. It's hard enough on one's mind being out here all alone with the cacti and the rattlesnakes. All the while the sun is beating down on the brim of your brow. Like I had mentioned earlier, I would like to try to sell that cube as well as many other things that we had managed to collect, so we began loading them up into our wagon and off we went on a little trading mission to a nearby frontier town. But on our way there, we would also be stopping in at a friendly tribal settlement as well to do a little bit of trading with them, and this whole trade mission was actually going quite well and we were making a good bit of silver. However, nobody actually wanted to buy the golden cube, not at all. Most likely because they too have heard the rumors. So, reluctantly, the only thing that we could really do would be to abandon the cube in the forest. And that's exactly what we did. For the sanity of Jim Bob, it had to be done. Now that we've made a little bit of pocket change and gotten rid of the cube, it would be time to go back home. But on our way back, we would stop in at a nearby item stash. There didn't appear to be any enemies. It's possible that the Slicer gang hasn't found out about this little hidey hole yet. Within was a very strangely designed bow that was capable of firing 3 arrows at once, so of course we took it. We had finally arrived back home, and we actually ended up purchasing 2 chickens while we were out at the frontier town. These little buggers are gonna make us plenty of eggs for breakfast. However, you know just as well as I that the desert here is quite a dangerous place for man, let alone for poultry. And because of that, we would quickly deconstruct some runes, that way we could use the blocks that we got from them to begin building some brick fencing to try and protect our little egg layers as best we could. However, late into the night, I noticed that Jim Bob seemed very stressed out. It would seem that he's going through an extreme cube withdrawal. The amount of stress this put on him would eventually cause him to go into a temporary coma, dropping to the ground right next to the campfire as the rain was pouring upon his head. It would seem that leaving that cube out in the forest was a horrific mistake. There's no way for Jim Bob to survive in a coma for 6 days lying out on the ground. This was the end for Jim Bob. Yeah, I got you, didn't I? You think I would leave that thing out in the forest without knowing that this would happen? No. We already had a quest where a visitor was offering to help us. Naturally, with my foresight, I knew that we would be able to accept this when this happened to Jim Bob, and of course we did, so Theo here has joined us. And as you can see, Theo also has quite the skill set, in terms of melee and cooking, at the very least. He would quickly sweep up Jim Bob and put him into his nice, comfy little bed. You rest there, pal, because we've got plenty of work to do and you're gonna need your strength for day 50, which realistically is just around the corner when you think about it, but that doesn't mean that we weren't having our fair share of hardships before then. As a matter of fact, here's one now, a man-hunting pack of koala bears. They may appear to be cute and cuddly, but these are a devious sort of little creatures thirsting for human blood. You know, a good question is, how did they even get out here? Maybe they fell off the back of some type of circus wagon. I don't care. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, there wasn't much that Theo was really all that good at, so when he wasn't fighting off the local wildlife and or circus animals, we would have him just kind of deconstruct some runes so that we have resources. Finally, after several days, Jim Bob was awake and of sound mind, and he was also finally cured of his obsession with that disgusting cube. Kids, that just goes to show, anytime a stranger drops a golden cube on the ground, you shouldn't pick it up and start worshipping it. Lesson learned. With Jim Bob out of commission for so many days, I felt like I was completely behind on building our town, so I decided to kind of focus on that for quite a while, specifically these ruins here that were right next to our camp. As I mentioned, I believe this was some sort of abandoned mining town or something of that effect, so this was most likely a storage depot for coal and stone and rocks and whatever else they were mining out of these mountains. However, for us, this beautiful stone structure shall be our hall of justice, our courthouse, our main vein at the end of the city. Because truly, what is a society without law and order? Since we don't exactly belong to any nation or faction, we shall be declaring our own with our very own flag. An extremely simplistic design for the flag here. As you can see, we have the rising sun to symbolize the rising sun of the desert, along with the red background to symbolize the heat of the desert, as well as the white border to symbolize the beautiful clouds. For a time, we would focus on harvesting our crops, specifically our fiber corn, and we would also try to expand and create new growing zones for fiber corn, as most of our town is going to be built out of wood. We would begin working on a proper mess hall, essentially just a place that we could store food, cook meals, and enjoy those meals in each other's company. We also built a beautiful wood stove, which was much more efficient than a campfire, but also would heat up the room when it was winter time, which was very useful. And let me tell you, you could fry one heck of an egg on that bad boy too. A bit of time later, and we ended up having an escaped convict by the name of Veronica who was wanting to join us here. Now, I know I said we're all about law and order, but as far as we're concerned, we're the only law and order around these parts, so we accept it. Besides, we'll keep a good eye on her, and upon further inspection, it would appear she's pretty good at talking, so she'll be a great warden, and she could do a little mining for us, and maybe a little shooting if need be. Now look, she wasn't exactly the best shot, but she did bring her very own rifle, which was pretty cool, so we would let her do a good bit of hunting for us as well against some dromedaries in the area. The dromedaries didn't exactly appreciate it though, and we had to help her out a little bit. After doing so, not only would we have dromedary meat, but we would also have the head of the animal, which we could use for taxidermy. We could put it in our kitchen, or anywhere we would like, but this one went in our kitchen, and it really beautifies the place. I think it ties the room together. We would then end up having a raid from a local tribe, unfortunately, although it only seemed to be one gentleman carrying around an old-timey musket. Most likely smooth bore, meaning it's not very accurate, but no doubt it packs one heck of a punch, so we'll have to be very careful here and try to keep our distance. We tried that for a little bit of time though, and then we ended up equipping a bayonet onto our musket, and Veronica began poking him a little bit while Jim Bob came from the side. And that ended up seeming to do the trick. After that, we would begin expanding our proper accommodations in the form of a tent and some more camping equipment, and then of course we would also begin working just on the outside of our kitchen on a nice chess table. Believe it or not, everyone's a bit sick of cloud watching, so this should be a nice form of recreation. Then late one evening, we had a colonist named Mullen who had arrived and wanted to join. Not too much in terms of her backstory, which was a little odd, but we did end up accepting, and she also had a pretty decent bit of skills, I guess. She wasn't very good at much. We all gathered around the fire that night to begin kind of getting more of her story. We were a little bit suspicious of her, to say the least. But we had no time to interrogate her, as it was now day 50, and cowpokes, you know what that means, yet another boss battle. For day 50, we're going to be taking on a couple of Impid siblings known as the Jade Twins. They hail from an Impid tribe in the desert mountains who, you might have guessed, seem to see jade as some type of holy material. Though we respect their religion and their culture, we're going to stomp these two into oblivion and mount those jade masks on our wall. It should be noted that the bow being used by the female sibling was very powerful, so we had to keep our distance. As for her brother though, we would trample him with our horse carriage. Shockingly, he didn't die. As you might imagine, the sister seeing her brother stomped into the ground was a little bit disheartening for her, so she decided to flee the area. She had managed to flee the area, but he was still here, and best of all, he was not unwaveringly loyal, which is kinda surprising. Now, normally in my 100 days videos, I don't try to recruit the bosses or anything like that, or even have that as a possibility due to the fact that they normally will have some type of body modifications making them very OP, but these guys don't actually have that since it's the Wild West. He does, however, have some pretty high resistance, so I guess that kinda makes it fair. Now, taking him prisoner though made me realize that we need some proper prisons, and where better than at the end of our courthouse, so that's exactly what we began building. However, this was interrupted. You remember Mullen and how we were super suspicious of her? Yeah, turns out she's an enemy from the Slicer gang. She turned on Jim Bob and Theo in the dead of night, trying to shoot them in the back. Theo bopped her on the head with his bottle though, and she was dead. We'll need to be more careful with who we allow to join us from now on. Speaking of which, it was almost time for Theo to depart the town and go about his merry little way, but that didn't sit too well with us, as I wasn't ready to let him leave. I wanted him to stay here. And to make sure that that happened, I decided to arrest him. We threw him into the town jail, and we would actually begin trying to recruit him. After that though, we began working on some more proper housing for everyone, as well as some more pathing around the town, that way everyone knows where they're going. But we were once again being attacked by the Slicer gang, this time a lone desperado wielding a rifle. He caught us right in the middle of construction right around noon, and a shootout began right in the middle of town. The poor fool was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely out of his wits. And that led him down a path that ends right here, right now. It was around about this time that I realized our impid boss by the name of Dowen was missing his left and right leg as well as his left arm. We would attempt to do surgery, but this would fail as we were trying to install a peg leg. We'll try again when we have better medicine. I know there's a lot I could do to this room to make it a lot better, but I don't know, I'm sticking with the Wild West jail cell theme. In the meantime though, we would further increase the amount of structures in our town by adding a proper storage facility to try and hold all of our goods, as up until this point we've just kept them in the courthouse. Late one evening though, we had a doctor by the name of Sleepy who was wanting to join the colony. Just what we needed, I thought to myself, after failing to perform surgery, but she's kind of more of a barbaric medieval style doctor, so her medical skill is actually very low. Either way, we're happy to have her though. There are numerous other ways that she can contribute to the colony, such as protecting it with her increased melee skill. By this point, we had also finally recruited Theo back into our ranks. It didn't take much, we just had to tell him we were sorry about arresting him, and we really didn't want him to leave, pretty please. He and Jim Bob sat down at the table to have a nice conversation and to make up over a couple of brewskis. I got a little bit impatient waiting around for a quest, or some enemies, or somebody to drop some good medicine, and then I began to think that this is the Wild West, that most likely won't be coming, so I tried my hand at surgery once more, and it ended up working. I also made sure to clean the room this time. We would also end up having a stranger approach by the name of Brody with pure white eyes, who claims to have mastered some type of folk knowledge, meaning that he doesn't need to sleep or eat. Though he is a bit strange, we didn't really see him as a threat, so we ended up accepting him into the town. We're quickly becoming a city of misfits, but that's completely fine by me. Brody here is going to be a great cook. As you might remember earlier on in the video, we had completely failed to tame any animals for the town, but not this time. We ended up taming a zebra. It's no Kentucky stallion, but it is shaped like a horse and we can ride it, so good enough. I also ended up naming it Merlin because riding it around was magical. Anyhow though, we had detected a logging worksite by a nearby impid tribe, separate from the one that the bosses came from earlier. We really needed some logs, and since they had so many of them, we thought we'd just help ourselves. Now that's not to say they didn't try to put up a pretty decent fight. I mean, they did, but all they really had were some throwing rocks, so, you know. Thankfully though, this lady hadn't died, so we would begin healing her, that way we could take her back to our town and begin the recruitment process. We also located their log storage, but this is by far not enough, so we began deconstructing their structures here at the camp, that way we could take them back home with us as well for our own construction projects. The first of which would be a proper speaking podium, as well as a large table with chairs, that way we could delegate inside the courthouse. Then I realized we had managed to finally finally recruit the impid boss into our ranks, a vital part of the community now, I'm sure, as he would be helping out with new construction projects like this saloon that we're building. Because is a town even a town if it doesn't have a saloon? No. No, I don't think it is. We had placed quite a few recreational items within the saloon, such as a billiards table, but I think the favorite among everyone in town seems to be the poker table. But my dear friends, it is now day 75, meaning of course that it is time for our third boss battle. It would seem that we're going to be dealing with the Slicer gang once more. However, this appears to be Slicer Jr., the daughter of Slicer, of course, and she has also brought along a hound master from the gang with several Labrador retrievers. Make no mistake, my friends, the Slicer gang feeds these puppers gunpowder, so they're quite vicious. They were the first to attack us, as Slicer Jr. and the hound master would keep their distance for a moment. Unfortunately, the dogs would get a hold of Brody, and they ended up killing him. But his sacrifice gave us a moment to catch them on fire with impid breath. Slicer Jr. would make her move with her grenades, but we all moved in quite quickly on her. After we had managed to take her down, next up was the Hound Master and a handful of his doggos. But they too would quickly fall before our might. But even so, we had lost one of our own during this battle. Retribution and revenge must be had for this catastrophic loss. Funny enough, we had just so happened to take Slicer Jr. into our prison instead of killing her out on the battlefield. And though we didn't have any gallows, justice would be served nonetheless, right here in the middle of the courthouse. Everyone seemed quite satisfied with the execution of Slicer Jr., and they'll actually have a mood buff for quite a little while. We also held a funeral for Brody, but I forgot to get footage of that. It also went well. Late one evening, we had some visitors who were coming to town, so we decided to sell them a pistol as well as a crossbow and some cloth. We made a teeny bit of silver off of it, but most importantly, we bought a book called The Fragments of Shadows. It is some type of manifesto written about someone's experiences with a golden cube that's quite beautiful and that also destroys minds. Does that sound familiar by chance? A little bit of time later, and I had sent Gem Bob out to try and tame more zebras. That way, eventually, everyone in town should have their own striped stallion. Of course, though, we needed somewhere to put them all, so we ended up building a very small pen just off the side of Sleepy's house. For right now, we're only going to have a few of them, because really that's all we can afford to feed. Now, we would also be further expanding our town on the western side of our town, moving our camping equipment over just a little bit to add in some new housing as well as a production room. To assist us further in our trade missions though, we would also end up creating an ox cart. That way we can haul plenty of resources that we plan on selling to neighboring towns. After that, we finally built a building that was specifically created for research. Now, this is something I like to do with our other forms of production like smithing and stone cutting as well, where they all have their own individual buildings. But since we finally have a research table, we're going to begin researching gunpowder defense, which will unlock a mortar, an organ gun, as well as a 12-pounder cannon. Though it must be stated that it is going to take quite a while for us to complete this research, so I just wanted to sit back and take a moment to marvel at our little town that we've created. Boy, oh boy, is it beautiful. But it is quite small, and I have some pretty big plans that can't be accomplished in 100 days. Now, a lot of the time for my 100 days videos, I never take it past that point because I just like playing around with the mods and doing different situations. This time is different. I do, if you guys want to, I do want to continue this indefinitely up until the point we hit, I don't know, 1,000 days maybe, so be sure to let me know. At some point, we ended up having some zebra that wandered in, and these zebra were actually previously part of a caravan, and thus they had plenty of items in their saddlebags. So to get the items, there was only one rational solution. Yes, indeed, we began hunting down all of these zebra, shooting them, lighting them on fire, cutting them up with a battle axe, really whatever it took. And this way, not only would we have all of these items, but we would also have some delicious charred zebra meat. Nothing goes to waste around these parts, friend. After that, though, if you believe it, it would seem that the Slicer gang has returned once more for yet another beating. At this point, I'm not quite sure when they'll learn that we're not so easy to push around. Now, we are a couple of silly billies here, earlier and we hadn't yet built any defenses, so we were taking cover in our doorways, and then we would begin to make a strategic retreat to the middle of town. This way we could lure them one by one through the city streets until we killed them all. Occasionally we would get lucky enough to have some fun with our covered wagon, and we would trample them as well. With their numbers completely depleted, those who were not quite dead decided to run away like a bunch of cowards. Though some of us were slightly injured during the battle, I do feel like it was quite worth it to engage them head on, as now we have quite a few weapons that we can sell during our next trading expo. But now with day 100 just around the corner, I decided to start focusing on some resource collection such as steel and even some components, that way we can use them for our new defenses. I would also put some focus and effort into beautifying our homes, because happy townspeople make for much better fighters, and they have a less likely chance to be in a mental break state when we need them. Late one night we had also finally managed to recruit the impid that we had taken prisoner from the logging camp so many days ago. She would make for a wonderful addition to the town, and she would also be very useful in helping us build some steel barricades to hide behind for the day 100 boss battle, as well as any other threats that we might encounter. Finally though, we had completed our research into gunpowder defenses, which will now allow us to build the mortar, the cannon, everything that we had mentioned previously, and so we began doing that, starting with the mortar, and then we would also end up building the cannon. I'm not gonna lie to you though, we built these, and you know, I do the boss battles custom, I create them, but I don't control which side of the map that they spawn on, and so these didn't spawn anywhere near the defenses, so I didn't use them at all. But I'm sure if we continue this past 100 days, they'll come in handy. Finally though, my friends, it is now day 100, and we did it! We made it to 100 days, although we still have our last boss battle to deal with. Interestingly enough, it is once again the Slicer gang, but this time around they have sent some of their elite riflemen. Unlike the normal groups of thugs that may attack us from the Slicer gang, these riflemen are hardened veterans, with the eyes of eagles. Thankfully though, we would be able to hide behind our barricades, though we were quickly taking a lot of damage. Luckily, some of our people had rode in on the zebras and managed to scurry around the enemies, lighting them on fire, causing a lot of chaos, and thus distracting our enemies, giving us an advantage. It was during this time, with a lot of strategy and luck, we had managed to kill many of the riflemen that were nearby. After killing the majority of their forces, the others would begin to flee, but they were still taking many shots at us, injuring several of our cowboys. 3 or 4 of them ended up getting away, but I'm sure we'll see them again. One of their surviving members that we didn't finish off actually had some pretty decent skills, so we decided that we would end up capturing them. Even so though, it would be quite a while before we managed to recruit them, as they had very high resistance. But my friends, we have finally finished day 100. I want to thank you all ever so much for watching today's video. I hope you have enjoyed truly. Like I mentioned, if you guys want to see 200 days, 300 days, if you want to keep this going, be sure to let me know, and be sure to support the video with a like or whatever. I normally don't like to ask that because it's the typical YouTuber thing to do, but it does let me know that you guys really enjoy the video and that you want to see it continued, so if you wouldn't mind, I would very much appreciate it. And you know, I want to mention, I am all about what you guys actually want to see here on the channel. You know, to me, this channel is just as much mine as it is your all's, right? And I bring that up because I recently made a community post about a month ago talking about how my Fallout 100 Days save was kind of messed up and that kind of thing, and I had said whichever, you know, suggestion from you guys gets the top comment, the most liked comment, whatever, would be the next 100 days video, and I'm not really obliging by that, like I said, by my word, by doing this video today, as the top comment was by our good friend just_dog110, who had a great idea about a 100 days at Dune, which I assume is, of course, in reference to the books and the movies, but I do want to do that, and I think that's a great idea. The only problem is I'm not familiar with Dune at all, and I don't want to just do it to do it. I want to do it because you guys want to see it, and because I know what I'm talking about, and because I feel like I can do it justice in a video, right? I want to be able to make the best video that I can, so I'm only simply putting it on the back burner. I don't want you guys to think that I've completely forgotten about that. But my friends, I love you ever so much, and once again, I hope you have enjoyed. I will see you next time. Goodbye. Why, boy howdy. Welcome back everyone to the whippin' Wild Wild West, where around these parts, friend, you can catch us at the local saloon shooting some billiards or possibly riding around on our wild zebras. Yes indeed, the West is not for those of you with a tender heart, especially since I've recently added the mod RimDead Redemption, adding brand new weapons, apparel, factions, and much more. A massive thank you to DJ Frado98 for suggesting this mod. Alright cowpokes, first things first, it's very cold outside as it is winter, and thus a couple of our folks are having a little bit of hypothermia, which is no bueno. Now to combat this little issue, we would end up making some nice frock coats, that way we could wear them to keep ourselves nice and snuggly warm. However, most of our people already had coats, but something they did not have were some nice pelt boots, which would do the same for their little toesies. We would then begin collecting some resources such as steel for a special little project. My pioneering friends, these are called lampposts and they produce light. I know, a revolutionary idea, but keep in mind these are not witchcraft, my friends, and the best part about these lampposts is they actually don't require any fuel after being created, which should save us a lot in terms of our wood consumption. I then spotted a kangaroo sleeping out on the soft sand, not exactly something I was expecting to see out here in the West, but we'll eat it either way. We make do with what we have out here, even if that means eating a humanoid marsupial. I also want to take a moment and mention that with RimDead Redemption we have 3 brand new factions that have been added to the planet, and just as well you may notice the planet looks a little bit different, and that's because we've added RW's Planet Atmosphere mod, which is much more realistic and beautiful. In the meantime, we're also going to begin researching modern furniture. Not to worry though, we're still in the Wild West of course. We're only doing this for 3 specific recreation items, with those being the roulette table, the piano, and the darts board, which would go perfect in our saloon. We have some really big projects in mind for the town, but we're going to need wood for any projects that we want to build, so we're actually going to be sowing a small tree farm. However, we would also end up experiencing our first raid of the episode in the form of some impid tribes people who were coming to smash our skulls in. We're a bit impatient though and decided to take the fight and or our little mortars here to them. We snuck up on them just in the cover of darkness before releasing our 12-pound mortars on their heads, crushing theirs well before they would have the opportunity to try and crush ours. Poor little fools. Now I don't know if they're from the same tribe as some of the other impids that we're familiar with, but these fools appear to have plenty of jade as well. With the threat neutralized though, we were going to move on to more recreational activities. We were going to have a drum party right here in the saloon, baby. We were banging on the drums, riding our zebras all over the damn place, and Theo was shaking that rumpa-bum-bum. As you might imagine, it turned out to be pretty darn fun, giving everyone a mood buff, which they're gonna need as they're working their fingers to the bone planting more trees. We then got into contact with some settlers who were asking us to take out a nearby bandit camp. In exchange, they would actually give us a masterwork musket and we could take anything we liked from the bandits. We of course accepted this offer, as we were probably going to take them out either way. We began making our way down there, and after arriving, we were none too impressed with this teeny tiny base and its piss poor bandits. It's about damn time we rocked their socks for them. We were the first to fire, giving us the advantage over the bandits, though they did have some ample opportunities for cover as they were hiding behind trees in the forest and ancient structures. We did our best to flush them out from behind cover, which almost ended up being a bit of a mistake as our newest impid companion was quickly down. But after that, everyone else rushed in and killed a fellow bandit, making the other one flee, who unfortunately got away. After that, we would have to begin fighting some fires that were started by, well, our impid companion to ensure that our ox cart wasn't burnt to a crisp. And then we were free to go throughout the bandit camp looking for any goods, but we only found a head wrap and that was about it. Nonetheless, we loaded the head wrap as well as some furniture from the camp up into our wagon and headed back home. To elaborate on that a little further, the furniture would be deconstructed for wood. We'd stopped in at a local tribe to sell the head wrap as well as the bandits' weapons. We ended up using the wood from the furniture to quickly build a pretty little basket to store all of our vodka, beer, and any other alcoholic beverages in our saloon. I also wanted to mention that the settlers had stopped in at our town and dropped off the musket that they were going to give us as payment for killing the bandits. It had some very interesting artwork that was apparently an engraving of cooks playing roulette. Okay. A little bit of time later though, and we began expanding the camp section of our town with some new tents as well as the proper amenities to go along with them. That way anybody using them will be quite happy. They were a good temporary alternative to our cabins while we're waiting to stockpile more wood and also using what we have to build cabins. Late into the evening though, I noticed that Jim Bob here was having some insane ramblings, no doubt caused by that damn golden cube. Theo would finish his extensive research into modern furniture, now allowing us to create the recreational items that we discussed earlier. Now, along with these, I've also built a beautiful cloth rug. Obviously, this makes the place look much better and is from the Gloomy Furniture mod that I have added to the mod list in the video description. As we continue this series, I'm just going to keep adding them to the same list, so you can always find them there. We would also end up building a small wooden chicken coop near our residential housing. That way it's much easier for us to take care of our chickens as well as keep predators away from them like mountain lions. We then had someone in need, a young scout by the name of Christy, requesting our assistance. Apparently some tribespeople were coming after her and she was offering to become a part of our town if we were to help her, so we quickly accepted. And after she arrived, I'm quite glad we did. She is now going to be our dedicated researcher with that intellectual skill, and because of that burning passion and her shooting skill, we could really teach her how to defend the town properly with a rifle. But it would seem that that is going to be a skill that she'll need to train on the go as we move along with this battle, because here come the tribespeople as we speak. However, I did have something of an idea, you could say. Yes, indeed, we would utilize our cart and carriage to run over as many of these sons of bitches as possible, just before leading them back towards our base, where they would meet a sudden and abrupt end by our mortar fire, as well as any bullets we had whizzing at their heads, of course. With most of their friends turned into a fine mist in the desert sand, the others would begin to flee like the cowards that they are. Luckily for us, the extent of our suffering were only a couple of flesh wounds here and there, no big deal. We also ended up having a combat supplier visiting our town a little bit later. We didn't really have much of interest that we wanted to buy from them, but we ended up selling them some of the weapons that we'd stockpiled, and we made a little bit of silver. Speaking of which, we would also end up hauling in all the weapons and jade and silver and anything else that our raiders had dropped. After that, we had a celebratory party in the saloon. The party may have ended, but the fun never stops, as Jim Bob and Veronica have quite the love story now. He won her over by exaggerating his own accent or something, I don't know, but what I do know is they're staying in the same cabin now in the same bed, so you tell me. But with that, my friends, it is now day 125. Ah yes, a quarter of the way there, but unfortunately we have a boss battle to deal with. She may look a little bit familiar to you as she was the boss in our previous episode as well, and she's also the sister of Duin. She's the other half of the Jade siblings, with one hell of a bow, as well as her entourage of Jade warriors, of course. Though tough as nails, even the strongest minerals, such as Jade, succumb to heavy pressure eventually. Sadly, this would be true for the Jade sister as well. With their legendary leader dead in the dirt, the entourage would begin trying to flee. Well, the only one that was still left standing, but he too would die. And it must be said that it brought us no joy to kill the Jade sister. Well, maybe a little bit, but everyone except for her brother, that is. Something else that brought us great joy was capturing one of her entourage members that is not unwaveringly loyal, so we will be able to recruit them as well. And even though we absolutely hated her, we would allow Duin to bury his dead sister next to our colonist. Only and simply because we respect him. In the meantime, Theo here had a really nasty, bubbling infection in his left leg, but thankfully he would develop develop an immunity, hence why I hadn't mentioned it previously. Now, by this point, we had managed to accumulate a good abundance of items, as well as a couple of zebra foals that we didn't really feel like trying to feed, so we were going to take them out to a local tribe and begin selling them as well as our items. These tribespeople had a very interesting book called Nocio Undeath. It seems to be some type of fantasy book, although it is stated to be a true account of some type of cult escapee investigating a giant pit in the ground with some type of fleshy creatures. See what I mean? It can't be real. After we had returned back to the town, Jim Bob here was trying to tame some donkeys to add to our collection of rideable animals. They're going to be staying in the same pen as our zebras, so hopefully they make some Z-donks like the ones that I saw at the zoo when I was a child. Ah, fond memories. Let me know if you've seen a Z-donk before, I'm curious. However, I'm afraid the fun couldn't last forever, as we have more cannibal tribespeople coming to try and skin us and flay us alive and eat our flesh. Now me, personally, I prefer my flesh to stay on my brittle little bones, so of course we were going to begin fighting back. However, they had rushed into us before we could really dig in with our defenses, which put us at a massive disadvantage. In many cases, we were having to try to retreat back into our residential housing. Now that being said though, the majority of our townspeople, or those who hadn't already fled back to their houses, had stayed together in one little clump. What we were doing here is trying to lead our enemies around the bend and keep our distance from them as we shot at them. Eventually, this seemed to have worked. As the remaining cannibals attempted to flee the area, we would descend upon them like righteous angels, killing those who we could. And it would once again seem that we've lucked out. Though many of our people were injured with several wounds, nobody ended up dying. Now that we've ensured that we are safe and sound, we would also need to make sure that the town's economy is also safe and sound, so we ended up building a granite bank. Double-walled, of course, for that extra measure of security, also with 4 complementary steel safes to ensure that our silver is properly secured. However, this will take a while, so in the meantime, we're going to do a bit of charity work. We had some beggars who had entered our town requesting some herbal medicine for a compadre of theirs that was severely injured on the road, so we did happily oblige, as we're not monsters. Who knows, someday they may even return the favor. A little bit of time later though, and the leader of a nearby frontier town has told us about a legendary bear in the area. Supposedly they've issued this challenge to us to try and kill the beast in exchange for some goodwill to them, just simply as a little fun challenge. It's what they're saying, but to me it sounds like this beast is probably attacking their caravans or killing their people, and they want it gone. Either way, we're not ones to turn down a challenge. Mounting our speedy little zebras, we quickly approached the area that the bear was sighted in. The beast was absolutely massive and had several scars. This won't be easy. Jim Bob quickly began firing off shots at this monstrosity. Theo was with him, but Jim Bob wanted to do this all on his own. After hours of running and shooting, it was finally over. We had taken down the large beast, but it would seem that in exchange for its life, the beast had to take a piece of Jim Bob as well. Using its ferocious claws, it cut out his left eye, taking it straight to hell with it. Eradicating a bandit camp and now killing a legendary bear. No doubt Jim Bob is becoming something of a celebrity around these parts. Not only would this bear provide plenty of meat for stews and steaks for many days to come, but its pelt would also fetch a fair price. By this point, we had finally recruited Angst, who is an elite riflewoman of the Slicer gang, and of course we quickly equipped her with the appropriate weapons so she can help us protect our own. Then something wild was happening. Casanova had proposed to Veronica, and she said yes. They would then spend some time together cutting down our tree farm so that we have some building materials. Ah, true love activities. We had also finally finished our bank, and it even had a nice little desk in the front. Eventually, I'd like to have people in the town having their own roles, like a banker, maybe a shopkeep, stuff like that. And then something tragic happened. Yeah, Veronica broke things off with Jim Bob. Perhaps he was letting his newfound fame go to his head, I don't know, but they're not sleeping together anymore and they're in separate cabins. Back on the topic though of giving people separate roles throughout the town, I also want to have, as I mentioned in the first episode, some different buildings for these different types of shops, so we ended up building a tailoring area as well as a stone cutting area. But the larger the town gets and the more money we have here and the better life is for us essentially, the worse the raids will get, so I would also end up beginning to build some walls and something of a fortification around the town, starting with the western section. With day 50 just around the corner, I thought defenses would be awesome to have so that we don't die, of course, so we were mining out some steel, during which time we also managed to recruit Black as well as Briggs into our town. And then we moved on to building actual defenses. We ended up building another 12-pound mortar as well as an organ gun. It wasn't much, but it might help us out a little bit. But my friends, just like that, like a flash of lightning, it is now day 150. We are halfway to our goal. For this boss battle, it would appear that we're once again taking on the Slicer gang. However, this fella is not your usual thug. He is the well-known bounty hunter that goes by the name of Philly Sparks. He carries around his own Gatling gun, and he has most likely been hired given the new fame that Jim Bob has. No doubt hoping to claim the fame himself of being the one who killed him. Well, I hate to tell you there, Philly Sparks, but that's not what's going to happen. Not if we have any say in it, you son of a bitch. Okay, I'm getting a little carried away, but we're going to mash his head in. We were pinned down for a hot moment by the Gatling gun, and we couldn't really move, but eventually, we got the upper hand. Now that the bounty hunter and his Gatling gun were out of the picture, we could chase down those remaining Slicer gang thugs and finish them off as well. Ah, Philly Sparks, you've decided to side with evil, you poor dumb fool. Unfortunately, it would cost you your life. Not before we would take your clothing, though. Phew, almost forgot about that part. Clothing is almost an even more vital commodity around these parts than a weapon to protect yourself with, as you might have guessed. I must say, though, we were getting a bit tired of the Slicer gang attacking us here at our home, so we began to think, maybe we should take the fight to them. We began uninstalling our defenses as well as building an ox cart to carry them. There was a nearby Slicer gang base that was called Adam's Daggers. This seems to be some type of chapter or sub-faction of the gang overall, led by a fella by the name of Adam, as you might have guessed. Some of them even appeared to be the kinfolk of Christie, though I don't think that means they'll take it easy on us. No doubt the gang, as well as Adam himself, has an iron grip on their loyalty, I'm sure. Not to worry though, if there's anything that can break an iron grip that we've found, it's a good cannonball straight through the old sternum, which also just so happens to be something that we have an abundance of for these poor saps. As we used our artillery against them, we would also try to flank them on Zebraback. Ah yes, we had them at quite the disadvantage, you could say. We even managed to take down Adam himself, a sight that really warmed our hearts, especially after all the times that they've raided us. You know the drill by this point. All of our enemies are spineless, so once their leader falls, they have to run away. Just after the battle, we would utilize our time properly by going throughout the base and ensuring that there was no one looking to ambush us within. I'm afraid to say, though, that one of our impid companions with the name that I dare not try to pronounce had died during the battle, though. Some time later, after returning home, we would end up burying him alongside our other fallen friends. A somber price to pay for victory. The deaths of our friends weighs heavy on our minds, as well as the safety of our townspeople and our town in general. So, of course, we would begin working on more walls, this time towards the southern section of the town. We've also had Briggs working on a special little project that he actually finally completed. This is a Parisian eye, which Angst would install in Jim Bob's left eye socket. Now, I do need to get a mod so that we can see this bougie eye in all its glory, but it's essentially a beautiful prosthetic which actually increases his social impact, and personally I also think that it goes quite well with his new renowned status. Now that Briggs has finally finished his extensive work on Jim Bob's eye, I would actually have him work on more of a community project now. He's creating some bulletproof waistcoats. As you might imagine, these will protect everyone with some ample protection from bullets, but only in the torso area. If we get shot in the head or our our limbs, it's not going to be great. We would also begin trying to improve the quality of life for all of our townsfolk, such as by building this cottage fireplace in our saloon so everybody can stay nice and toasty warm during the winter time. And then Jim Bob and Veronica were having something of an ex-lover's quarrel and decided to solve it with a fist fight. I don't know. We had a man-hunting pack of cougars enter the area, and a large group of them at that, which ended up making life a little bit more difficult. Believe it or not, the animals were quite quick on their feet, or paws, I should say. Either way, they were rushing us as we were trying to run them over with our wagon, which kinda sorta worked for a hot moment there. But inevitably, we were running away from the crazed animals as they were trying to chew our faces off, lighting them on fire, shooting them, and stabbing them several times with our knives and swords, and eventually we came out victorious, as you know, turning a situation where we were about to become the food into a situation where we were stuffing ourselves with food. And our walls. Hello, kitty kitty. After that little excursion was finally over with, I wanted to go and set up a camp somewhere that we could actually get some wood so we can continue expanding our town, so I actually went down south of the base. But with this being Slicer Gang territory, an ambush was inevitable. Now, if this were day 75, it'd be the perfect time for a lone boss battle where this person would get their own little graphic on the screen and I would say something fancy about them, but we decided to just kind of run her over with the wagon until she was dead instead. Well, that definitely made things much easier. After that, we would finally arrive at our designated camping spot, and we parked our wagons and immediately began getting everything out of them, such as our tents. However, I don't think we would really end up needing these. I just packed them just in case we'd be here for a while, but thanks to the great plant skill of Jim Bob and Veronica, it wouldn't take very long at all to get all these trees cut down. I also realize now how weird it was to send the two of them. Maybe I'm trying to get them back together. We would end up arriving back home shortly thereafter, dropping off all of our logs right in the middle of town square, sort of. Well, either way, all the wood that we had harvested out in the forest, along with all the wood that we already had, and what we were getting from our fiber corn fields would be perfect for building the remaining section of our wall around the town. But just like clockwork, before we could finish our wall completely, we were now being attacked by those jade worshipping impids. I will say that these impids always fight with a fiery sensation in their bellies, and it is quite impressive to an extent. However, with our superior weapons bouncing a few bullets off those jade masks and maybe even through them a time or two was child's play. I suppose they did start a cute little fire though that we had to put out before it burned down the whole damn town. One of them was also nice enough not to die out on the battlefield, that way we could take them into our courthouse and jail them and try to begin recruiting them. For the next little bit of time before day 175, excuse me because I think I've been saying 75 this entire time, either way though we would be finishing up what was left of our walls. But now that day is upon us, my friends. We are 3/4 of the way to our goal, and you know what that means. It is time for yet another boss battle, of course. Naturally, this third boss would also be quite the interesting character in our story. Associated with the cannibal tribes, we have Mosquito the Rattlesnake Charmer. He wields a plasteel shield as well as wears a plasteel helmet, but lacks any type of appropriate weapon. That is because his entourage of rattlesnakes are his weapons, his pets, and maybe even his friends, but nobody really knows why they follow him. I don't exactly expect this to be a cakewalk. It's hard enough hitting a moving target, let alone one that's as small as those little danger noodles. We aimed for Mosquito himself, thinking that if we took him down, the snakes would stop, but that didn't stop them at all, and they continued coming in hordes. We had managed to get quite lucky with many of our cannon and mortar rounds though, killing several in one volley. Just as well, many of them had sprung our traps as well, impaling them. We would chase down the last remaining rattlesnake, and finally this boss battle was finished, leaving us with several corpses of scaly little critters that we could turn into camp stew. I believe I may have underestimated my own defenses for that boss battle. If we hadn't had our barricades and traps and all of our mortars and everything, we definitely would have suffered some losses there in normal circumstances. Some time later though, and we had realized that the cannibal tribes people actually had a hunting site not too far away from the base. It would seem that they're supplementing their diets with animals. Human corpses must be few and far between these days. Jim Bob would ease the wagon in near the hunting site where they couldn't see us just before all of our townspeople jumped out and we began firing at these tribesmen. Now I could try to exaggerate and draw this out and pretend that this was quite a difficult battle, but I would be completely lying to you, because even when they got up close and personal, our bulletproof waistcoats seemed to save us. And other than some minor scratches and possibly a few flesh wounds or something along those lines, we were completely fine. Now all that was left to do was to search the area. There wasn't really too much of interest here. It would seem that they were hunting kangaroo, so I guess we'll be taking some of that meat as well as fur and their pemmican, but we would also end up deconstructing their structures here for their wood. That night though, I did realize that DeWin had a pretty nasty infection starting up in his right arm. We'll have to try to keep a close eye on that. Back at the town, I had created some garage doors for our wagons because we couldn't actually get them out without them, although I do like to think of them more as, maybe wagon gates. Yeah, that's it, wagon gates. Now, by this point, a few days had passed since DeWin got that infection in his arm, and it looked like we were going to be cutting it a little bit too close, and I was afraid that we would lose him, so we just went ahead and amputated it. Very 19th century of us. Before day 100, though, I wanted to try to get some more building in around the town, so the first thing we ended up building here was a new smith shop. That way we can have a blacksmith in our town. And of course, we put in some proper storage for all the steel they'll be using. Next up, we would build some additional residential housing around our courthouse. That way any new members that we end up recruiting have a place to stay instead of some tents. And then finally we moved on to a resource depot. You may notice I didn't actually build a floor or anything like that for this building at this time. Essentially it's just going to be for an overflow of resources like wood or steel. But then we finally recruited the impid known as Therrit into our ranks, who we've been working on recruiting for a while now. As you can see, Therrit here is okay at construction. He's one hell of a shot and an okay melee fighter, but it seems he'll mostly be tending to our donkeys and zebras. And of course we went ahead and equipped him with the appropriate apparel and weaponry. Late one evening, Sleepy had lost her marbles out in the rain and tried to kill Black. Luckily Jim Bob was there with a donkey and could kick her down into the ground a few times. And now she's a-okay. Sort of. Speaking of our donkeys and our zebras, unfortunately 2 of them ended up getting the plague, although I kind of forgot about this, and by day 100 I'm pretty sure they were cured. Well, either that or for 300 days we're gonna have some dead zebras. We then ended up having an interesting type of raid. Cult members called the Servants of Horrocks have descended from the desert mountains and have come to attack us. Not only are they dangerous, but they also appear to be quite clever and well educated, meaning that they're double dangerous. An educated brain isn't much though when you fire a mortar round straight through it. And even though they're well educated, they weren't very well equipped for this battle, so we turned them into strawberry pudding. They were quite strange looking people with even stranger items. Many of the cultists seem to have dropped some type of cube that appears to be based on the golden one that we had previously tangled with. A strange connection indeed. Jim Bob began to worry that this wouldn't be the last that we'd saw of the cultist. We would end up having a gunsmith trader from the Federal Enforcement Agency, which appears to be the new law in these parts. Luckily, they were willing to purchase those cubes off of us. I would say that's some good timing, and then we also ended up selling them several of our guns. Perhaps that'll help them further do their duty of protecting these citizens. Either way, we ended up making quite a bit of silver off of it. And, funny enough, we ended up purchasing 2 crocodiles for Jim Bob as well. A unique fella of legend is also going to need some unique pets to go along with him. And of course, they're going to need some names if you guys would like to provide those. Right before day 100 though, I wanted to spruce the town up just a little bit more and make it even more beautiful for all of our townspeople, further improving their quality of life. And I must say, even though the majority of these 100 days that have passed have mostly been us fighting with cult members, the Slicer gang, animals, just anything and everything in between, I am quite proud of the progress that we've made in our town. It has truly become quite the little bustling frontier village open to all traders and peoples. Except for thugs, cannibals, and cultists, of course. And just like that, my friends, We did it. Day 200, another 100 days under our belt. For our final boss battle, we'll be taking on the cultist once more, but they are led by Gabriella. Very little is known about her and the cult in general, of course, except for the fact that she is some type of leader within their ranks, sporting a specialized crossbow, and I think it goes without saying that she's batshit crazy. We slammed open our wagon gates and took out the old covered wagon once more for a ride. Sleepy would rush into the cultists, trampling several of them before they could even really get started towards our main defenses at the entrance. However, it was already too late as the majority of our enemies had already made it. Gabriella seemed to use her allies as cannon fodder, sending them into the line of fire. We were shocked by the complete disregard for human life. We had to retreat back into the town before we were overwhelmed. But Jim Bob had other plans, rushing Gabriella with his sword, hoping to end this here and now. However, she had overpowered him. He would attempt to try and crawl away, but then they were trying to kidnap him. Theo rushed out of the town gates to save his friend, his compadre who's been with him since the very beginning. As we began tending to Jim Bob's wounds, we noticed a golden glimmer lying next to Gabriella's body. It seems that she had possessed the golden cube this entire time. The coward cultist would attempt to flee the area, but we ran outside to try and gun them down as they were fleeing. A couple of them hadn't died, and they had a pretty good skill set. However, they were hardly human, with their minds being described as dominated by some type of void. These are not the type of people that we need as part of our town. Calling these bastards animals would be a disservice to all wildlife. With the battle finally over and the cultists escaping, we couldn't help but ponder the circumstances. Why was it that even though many of their members were hardly injured or killed, did they decide to try and kidnap Jim Bob and run away? And why is it that this damn cube has made its way back into our possession? I suppose only time shall bring answers. But my friends, I want to thank you ever so much for watching today's video and or episode. Like I mentioned, if you guys enjoy this and you want to keep it going, be sure to let me know, be sure to like and all that great jazz as well, and we'll keep it going for another 100 days, and we'll keep on doing that, I suppose, until we hit some type of climactic end, or, you know, we all die, or I guess that's the same thing. But I love you guys ever so much. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Jim Bob awoke to the roaring sound of a gigantic crash outside his door. It would seem all the townspeople are running somewhere. Even stranger, it's the middle of the day, yet the sky is getting darker. Perhaps there's been an eclipse. Jim Bob made his way to the town square just outside the courthouse doors, and what he saw there was very unusual. The stone structure that was just outside of our town walls appears to be right slap dab in the middle. Unusual to say the least. Jim Bob would begin investigating the structure further. He spotted strange lines on the structure, going in different directions. He would begin running his hands across them until he found the center point, and this ended up happening. That's probably not a good sign. The sky got much darker now. Nothing really seemed to change until the dead began to rise. The corpses of our fallen foes have come back once more, with a lust for blood and revenge, now hidden in the shadows of a black mist. The atmosphere around us became so thick, it was as if we were breathing in the darkest and heaviest of smoke. Even our old friend Gabriella, whose head we split in half with an axe, seemed to come back to life as well. Although she seems to be the least of our worries at the moment, because within this black mist seems to be hordes of undead coming straight for us. We were rushing in to try and protect our town, but Gabriella wasn't exactly going to make it easy for us, so we would have to slash her in half before we could. But by this point, the horde was already upon us. We attempted a retreat, but unfortunately Briggs and Sleepy would be left behind as they were completely surrounded. Our companion Black was also also defeated by the undead as he was trying to use the mortar to stop them. Our streets were completely filled with them. Nowhere seemed to be safe and we were being easily overwhelmed. These monsters care very little for pain, and the only thing that seemed to be able to stop them was a bullet through the brain. Briggs had made his last stand in our blacksmith building with a coach shotgun. Meanwhile, Jim Bob and the others were attempting to rescue Duwin, who was trapped inside his home. After that, everyone made a break for the courthouse as it had the thickest walls in the entire town. Unfortunately though, Jim Bob almost didn't make it inside. Thanks to the power of community, teamwork, and friendship though, we managed to get him in here. We hid ourselves inside the prison cells, but now the question is, where do we go from here? With the courthouse and the prison cells all completely surrounded, we could hear the undead on the outside pounding on the walls. Utilizing this time to tend to our wounds, eat a meal, and even attempt to repair the structure itself so that they wouldn't break through so easily. Constantly repairing the doors and walls wouldn't be sustainable though, as you might have guessed. This is a sticky situation. There were far too many of them. We would need to find a way out of these cells and out of the town. We began deconstructing some of the back walls that led outside. Jim Bob, of course, was much faster because of his construction skill. He, Theo, and Duwin would all rush outside and try to rescue the others, but unfortunately they were spotted by the horde. Jim Bob would manage to get away, but the others were not so lucky. With nowhere left to run, they were absolutely fighting for their lives. Unfortunately, Duwin would end up dying, leaving Theo there to fend for himself. Jim Bob had rushed to one of our carriages and started whipping the oxes as hard as he could. He was going to try to save his friends, even if it cost him his life. But by the time he arrived, they were too far gone. Even if we had somehow managed to load them into the cart, they would almost definitely bleed to death by the time that we got them somewhere safe. Reluctantly, he would have to flee the area, leaving behind everyone who remained. Riding off into the dark abyss far from our home. I could do nothing but watch as all of our buildings burned. The town that we had worked so hard on was completely engulfed in flames and living corpses. Many of the companions and friends we've made thus far, crawling for their lives. Many who had already lost their lives being twisted and mutilated into monsters. Soulless vessels doomed to wander the earth with no purpose but to kill. Even our animals were not safe from this plague. Gone is the world that we once knew, now forever in shadows. Jim Bob had embarked on a journey to the nearest tribal settlement to look for help. Arriving there some odd hours later, the air was much clearer here, not near as thick, with the sun just barely beaming through the darkness above. It would seem that the shadows have yet to spread to this location yet. We had hoped to find someone within the village, but our first sight here was not a pleasant one. The ground was covered in blood, scattered randomly all over the camp. Perhaps even more strange, some of the blood seemed to lead up a path and was much, much darker than the rest, though the path did not seem to go anywhere. This camp seems to be entirely empty. Given our surroundings, I highly doubt that they picked up and left. Nonetheless, Jim Bob here is quickly starving. It'll be quite hard to get any answers here on an empty stomach. After a brief search of the camp, we had managed to find their slaughterhouse. There was some meat on the ground, though it was oddly twisted looking, you could say. Nonetheless, it's all that we could find, along with some bear berries, so we mixed them together in a skillet and cooked them on a campfire. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly the best meal that we'd ever ate. After giving the camp yet another good once over, it appeared to be completely devoid of life. There wasn't a soul here at all. And so Jim Bob would be on his way to the next town. This time around, Jim Bob is headed for a nearby frontier trading post settlement. It was much, much larger than the village that we had previously visited, and even more important, it was much farther from the slow-spreading darkness. After arriving, though, we had heard chitter-chatter from the townsfolk about a local monster that had been killed. In the town center there lie a great grayish-black looking beast, with jagged skin and horns upon its head, as if it were right out of some type of cultist holy book. This creature was far from the undead hordes that had attacked our town. Strange, but even stranger perhaps, was a dull purple rain that began to fall from the sky. Extremely odd to be sure, but for the moment it seemed quite harmless. We told the townsfolk of our situation, and even after killing their own monster, they were still quite skeptical. Nonetheless, because of our good relations with trading with them in the past, they would allow us to stay here for the time being. Finally, it seemed that Jim Bob might be able to get a proper night's rest. Or perhaps not. Their town, just as ours had been, is being completely overwhelmed by monsters. These poor fools have no idea what they're up against. They don't know that the only way to win in this situation is to run away. Jim Bob would attempt to make a break for his wagon, but was quickly intercepted.
May I stand unshaken amidst a crashing world? Did I hear a thunder? Did I hear you break?
What is this?
Time and time and time again you try, but the ending is always the same. May I stand unshaken amidst a crashing world.
It was only a dream. We're fine. Everything is fine. Everyone is fine, and more importantly. But one thing is for sure, something needs to be done about that damn cube.